I'm meteorologist Mike Mahalik, and we're going to cut right to the chase here because it's time to talk about winter. And right now, we're looking into the winter of 2021, 2022. It's hard to say those things, Jim. 2021, 2022. But with me is our chief meteorologist, Jim Sullivan, and long-range guru.
Yeah, we'll go with that, yeah.
Our favorite guest on the podcast, I would say, too, maybe.
Yeah, do you guys have like a punch card, like, you know, four appearances, the fifth one's free, or maybe I get a coffee or something? I don't know.
I think we got to get to 10.
Okay, 10 for the coffee.
By the end of this...
That's the coffee, right? That's all, right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, you know, it's fresh from the Keurig, Jim, so you're all good. This might be Folger's finest.
Okay.
And
I know what they say, you know, best part of waking up is...
Yeah. I think I want to dive right into the maps now. And let's just, let's show them what we have so far and what we're thinking about. So we'll start with the temperature map. And in our nice screen here, we should have that popping up any second now. But our tech man is waiting. There it is. Okay, we got it.
Boy, I think our tech man is ready to throw a monitor at us.
Yeah,
no, just kidding.
No,
we're very friendly with each other here at WeatherWorks.
In case everybody's wondering out there, if you listen to the podcast before, our tech man is Mike Priante, and he's been with us on the podcast a few times now. So he's doing a good job behind the scenes here.
Yeah, so we'll kind of delve into the whys a little bit more as we go through the podcast. This was our outlook that we put together last month. And it's kind of been out in the ether for about 2 or 3 weeks now. And, we are working on our updated outlook that'll go out later this month. So the gist was coldest air focus kind of across the upper Midwest, northern plains. I think that still looks good. And then relatively mild across the south, in particular, the southwest, and then the southeast, especially near the coast. And then a lot of ups and downs in between. The question kind of is what looks most persistent? So like a spot like you can look even the I-95 corridor where this outlook was leaning ever so slightly mild overall. That's with a lot of ups and downs. Mm-hmm. And the question is in that kind of swing zone, if you will, what will win out, the ups or the downs? For reasons that we'll delve into here a little bit more. I am becoming a little bit more confident that the downs might dominate a little bit more this winter. So it's kind of a preview here of our final outlook that's going out in a few weeks. Mm-hmm. Would not surprise me if we end up nudging the cold air a little bit farther south and east, which could be good news if you want snow. And if you don't want snow, you're just going to hope that we're a little bit off with that thinking. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at. And, the question is what wins out, the ups or the downs? That's often a common question.
I think it's important when people look at maps like these, though, too, is that they have to understand that, yes, you might be in an above normal area.
Yeah,
but
take for last. Yeah, I guess I'll let you finish your point. But take last winter for New Jersey an example. It was by temperature a mild winter in New Jersey last year, but here in North Jersey we got almost double our normal snowfall. So when it got cold, we made the most of it.
He didn't let me finish the point.
I'm sorry. I was so excited. I just had to blurt that out.
Well, my point was too is that yes, you might end up a little bit above normal, but it's not like the whole winter is going to be above normal. There's going to be variation, week to week, month to month and things like that. So I think sometimes when we look at maps like these, we're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm in the red. I'm getting no snow. It's going to be 75 all winter long.
Oh, don't we wish, you'll be able to golf in February, so on and so forth.
But so that's the overall temperature outlook we're looking at. So let's head on over to the precipitation outlook to see where the most active areas are going to be and where the most precipitation is going to fall.
Yeah, so, a few different areas that we're kind of targeting for active weather this winter. We'll kind of go west to east. First area is the Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies. What a La Nina does is it kind of strengthens the northern stream or the polar stream and the jet stream. And that polar stream often kind of slams right into the Pacific Northwest in a La Nina winter. So we're thinking it's going to be pretty active there. Another active corridor is kind of from parts of the Ohio and Tennessee valleys towards New England, riding along that big temperature gradient or swing zone we were talking about when we were talking about the temperatures. Where those ups and downs occurs, there's usually a lot of systems to go along with that. Then another area that we highlighted here was the Great Lakes. Again, they're close enough to the temperature gradient that they'll probably see a few larger systems, but we're also leaning towards a colder winter there. And as we, indirectly talked about a little earlier, you get cold air blowing across the Great Lakes and it tends to cause snow. So between getting, some clippers, maybe one or two larger storms, plus a lot of lake effect snow, we're leaning towards an active, wet, snowy winter in a good chunk of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you look at the map, you can almost pick out a storm track. If you squint and you get some binoculars or a microscope or whatever, you might be able to figure it out. But I see almost like a storm track here that looks almost like a coastal type development that could be happening at times, or at least something meeting up here, storms forming, and riding up the Appalachians. You certainly true. Yeah. So again, with the La Nina, which we'll kind of get into what that is here shortly. The subtropical jet stream, that's kind of the southern jet stream that brings all the moisture. A lot of times that's a little bit weaker, which is why we're leaning towards a drier than normal winter across much of the South, from California across the Four Corners, towards Texas, the Gulf Coast, and the Southeast, especially near the coast. And that might sneak into like Eastern Virginia as well. That's kind of why we're leaning dry there. But that polar jet stream is very active. And again, a lot of times it dips in the central part of the country. And a lot of times, kind of where it dips and then to the east, that's where your storms ride up and along. Right. And remaining dry in the Southwest there, certainly not something that they're looking for with how dry they've been.
Right.
And wildfires and things of that nature. So,
yeah.
I think from here, the all-important snow map is what we have to look at, because that's what everybody likes to see, at least the snow geese out there that they like to call themselves.
Oh gosh, would I be a snow goose then? I don't know.
I don't know. Sometimes
you could say I honk like a goose, but anyways, yeah. So yeah, here is the Snowfall Outlook. You kind of take where we think it'll be cold, where it'll be active, and that's kind of where you look for above average snow, and then where we're looking for it to be either warmer or drier or both. That's where we're kind of leaning towards less snow. So again, snow is inherently fickle. It can be a relatively warm and dry winter, but if it gets really cold for a week in the deep south and they get a snow event, all of a sudden they're at normal. So snow's inherently fickle, but we like the Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies for an active above average snow season. We also like a good chunk of the Midwest, the Great Lakes into the Northeast, especially New England, for it to be relatively active and snowy. I-95 corridor is kind of on the cutoff. I think I definitely like inland of 95 for it to be snowy. It's not that it won't snow along 95, but I think it comes down to what wins out, the ups or the downs. If the downs win out, I think we can, as I smack my microphone, I think we can.
Oh man,
I think we're okay here. If the downs went out, if it's a colder winter, you can probably shift that snowier corridor closer to or even over I-95. But if it's a little bit warmer, then it would probably favor inland. So I-95, it's definitely not a hopeless outlook if you like snow. Although, as is often the case, in more winters than not, I would hedge towards being a little farther inland for the most snow.
Right. I mean, there's always that mixing line, that dreaded mixing line that everybody loves. That sets up somewhere around the I-95 corridor, and figuring out where that's going to happen is certainly a tall task.
Yeah, sometimes 3 or 4 days out, we're still trying to figure out where that mixing line's going to set up. So, but yeah, so that's kind of what we're looking at for above average snow. There might be an area in the upper Midwest or northern plains where it's so cold that it just doesn't precipitate quite as often. So there might be an area there where it's not a warm winter, but maybe it's not snowy. And then, unfortunately, worried that the desert Southwest, Southern Rockies, less snow in the mountains than normal. Again, mountain snow is very important there because when that melts in the summer, that's where their reservoirs get a lot of their water from. So if they have a snowy winter there in the mountains, it wouldn't be the worst thing. But unfortunately, we're leaning against it right now. And then we are leaning a bit less snow than normal across parts of the southeast and the lower mid-Atlantic. Again, if they get one or two nice storms, that could certainly throw a wrench there. But for now, we are kind of cautiously leaning less snow than normal in that area.
Great. I think we need a little bit more background on, well, why are we forecasting this in the first place?
What are they thinking?
So where's Jim coming from and his long range team there? So let's talk about it. I think the first thing we'd like to cover is La Nina and the ocean temperatures and things of that.
Yeah. So El Nino, La Nina. And there we are. So yeah, the big number one. That is the La Nina. I guess we figured we'd talk about it first. So El Nino, La Nina, that describes water temperatures near the equator in the Pacific. A La Nina is when those waters are a little bit cooler, and an El Nino is when they're warmer. So you can tell by the blue that they're cooler right now. So we have a developing La Nina. Second winter in a row that's going to have a La Nina. Last winter was a La Nina. So basically, this is important because the warmer and cooler waters in the tropics, hurricane season is an example of that. There are always a lot of thunderstorms in the tropics. And those thunderstorms give off an incredible amount of heat. Because, whenever a cloud forms, it actually gives off heat. It's what we call latent heat release. So obviously those tropical thunderstorms, they're very tall and large. So they give off a lot of heat. And it's so much heat that it actually impacts the jet stream globally. It's one of our big pattern drivers across the globe. So El Nino and La Nina influence where those tropical thunderstorms are most persistent. So it's actually quite a powerful forecasting tool. As we'll touch on a little bit, there are different flavors to both El Nino and La Nina because with both El Nino and La Nina, you can say this was a La Nina winter that didn't snow at all. This is a La Nina winter that snowed a ton. And you can do the same thing with El Nino. So it's a very good starting point, but, it's kind of we try to pin down from there what flavor of El Nino or La Nina it'll be. But yeah, big starting point for our outlook. Looks like at least a solid week La Nina this winter. It may still intensify and approach moderate. Last winter was a borderline moderate La Nina, so might be similar intensity to last winter.
Interesting. So, obviously La Nina and El Nino is always a big pattern driver.
Right.
But I see you got circled there in the Western Pacific around Indonesia and the Philippines.
Yeah.
What's going on there? How does that affect the global pattern?
Yeah, so that's kind of an extension of what I was talking about with the tropical thunderstorms. And usually that area, the Western Pacific, it's called the Western Pacific Warm Pool, very aptly named. Those are typically
very creative on that.
Yes.
Us meteorologists when we name that one.
For all the names we have that aren't intuitive, it's always nice when we get one where it's like, wow, the name is actually kind of describing what it is.
It's perfect.
So those are usually the warmest waters in the world, and so they're like a major kind of center or driver for those tropical thunderstorms I was just talking about. And those waters being much warmer than normal tells us there's probably a pretty good chance that tropical thunderstorms are going to focus in that area. They've already been focusing there over the summer and into the fall. And a lot of our longer range forecast models kind of keep that up heading into the winter. And given what the water temperatures look like right now, I don't really have reason to expect that to change drastically. So again, and these waters in particular in the Western Pacific are important because if the thunderstorms are quiet there, it tends to argue against blocking. So 2019, 2020, we'll harken back to that poor excuse for a winter, and I like snow, so I won't hide my feelings for how I felt about that winter. That winter, the thunderstorms were really focused over the western Indian Ocean, closer to Africa, and they were very quiet near Indonesia into the Western Pacific. So that winter, there was essentially no blocking. It was a very fast-moving jet stream, a very mild winter. So as long as those waters are warm and we have a lot of thunderstorms there, it kind of gives us a chance, at least.
Interesting. So now how does that tie into the Zone 3 there in the North Pacific? Because it looks like there should be some sort of interaction going on.
Yeah, so the waters across the northern Pacific, I kind of look at it as the tropical waters and thunderstorms drive the pattern, and then the patterns and the water temperatures away from the tropics, they don't directly contribute to like thunderstorm development, at least not as much. And so I kind of look at that as those augment the patterns a little bit further. And what we have across the North Pacific is it's quite warm up there in general, but in particular, it's warm off the Asian coast near Japan and a little cooler south of Alaska. That's what we call a negative Pacific decadal oscillation. The PDO is the acronym for it. We have acronyms for everything here in meteorology, especially long-range meteorology. So the warm northern Pacific, it might kind of influence a large ridge in the jet stream near or just kind of south of Alaska, which can help fill North America with cold. Now, the question is, where does that cold dump in? With a negative PDO, with that cooler water south of Alaska, that might indicate that a good chunk of the cold does dump in farther west, which is our outlook. We have the cold centered, like, Northern Rockies, upper plains, upper Midwest. And then the question from there is, how often does that surge towards the East Coast?
Yeah. And then finally, Jim, we're talking about the North Pacific. And I'm assuming we're looking at blocking NAO type stuff there.
Yeah, the North Atlantic. Yeah, that would be, so for those of you who see the map, Zone 4, the water temperature pattern across the Atlantic, it is not only one that favors, active hurricane seasons, it's what we call a positive or warm Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, or AMO is the acronym for that. And so what we have is we have kind of a stripe of slightly cooler waters across like the tropics from, kind of south of Bermuda towards like the Canary Islands off of the African coast. And then we have warmer waters kind of surrounding that, so, from the Caribbean across the equator, it's warm. And then up and around the northern Atlantic, it's warm. And especially off the New England coast, off the Canadian Maritimes like Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, it's quite warm. South of Greenland, it's quite warm. And there is some correlation for this positive AMO pattern to lead to a negative NAO, which is a form of blocking, which is a kind of a buzzword that we've mentioned a couple times here.
And let's just jump real quick, Mike, if you don't mind jumping to the NAO graphic that we got from Penn State University. Just kind of explain how this happens. So there's this, I'll let you do it because, you're the expert here when it comes to the long range.
Yeah, so blocking in general, and we'll talk in particular about the NAO. So if there's no blocking, the jet stream it's really fast. It moves west to east, and it usually focuses closer to the pole. And that's important because north of the jet stream, it's cold. South of the jet stream, it's usually milder in the winter. So, if you have no blocking, you have a really fast west to east moving jet stream that struggles to dip south. It's usually a milder winter. Whereas if there is blocking, and what blocking is there's a big ridge in the jet stream, and the jet stream literally has to go around that ridge. It backs up behind it. So the jet stream, it buckles. You'll get bigger north-south kind of undulations within the jet stream. Mm-hmm. And, so where you get a big north undulation, that might make it warm. Or you have a big south undulation, you can get Arctic air diving south. So an NAO, that stands for North Atlantic Oscillation, when that is negative, that means there is a blocking high pressure near Greenland. And when you get a blocking high pressure near Greenland, that backs up the jet stream behind it over the eastern U.S. It tends to make it colder and stormier near the East Coast. And for our international listeners, the NAO is probably one of the most single important factors for places like the United Kingdom, Great Britain. A negative NAO is usually in place if it snows or gets cold there at all, and they're very mild without it.
Right. So, that's really good. We have to explain that because it's very important to our winters and very important to East Coast nor'easters that we like to see. Going back to the overall pattern, since we talked about blocking, we have a general sense of what that overall pattern is going to be like.
Yeah.
And, I think if we think about it, like you were saying, the cold air is going to be in the northern portion of the country, in the center portion of the country, maybe a little bit further west, maybe a little bit further east. It all depends.
Yeah.
It's just describe it a little bit of how you see this unfolding, or at least on average.
Yeah. So again, kind of a starting point, and what we did to kind of come to this idea is we took some years that have similarities to this year called analogs. I believe I kind of briefly touched on that, and we showed what the analog, kind of came up with what the analogs looked like. And big features in those analogs is a big ridge in the jet stream across the northern Pacific, which dumps that cold into, western Canada and the northern United States, especially like the northern plains and upper Midwest. A bit of a ridge off the East Coast, which is very common in a La Nina winter. It's called the Southeast Ridge, very aptly named. So I guess other things that showed up in the analogs that are a little interesting is in some of the analogs, that ridge over the northern Pacific extended all the way through Alaska towards the North Pole. And the years that happened, that really increases the cold, especially across the upper Midwest. But it also, the colder it is across the upper Midwest, the easier it is for it to bleed farther south and east. Meteorologists know this, cold air, especially in winter, it's very dense. So if it's persistently very cold, it's not difficult for it to ooze farther south and east. So years with that bigger ridging into Alaska, when we get that, they tend to be colder. Another thing that showed up in some analogs is ridging near Greenland and negative NAO. So it's interesting that blocking in those two places is showing up in a number of our analogs. So even though the mean pattern, we're kind of going kind of mild across the southern U.S. and kind of, in the middle up and down here along the I-95 corridor, and then colder towards the Midwest and the Great Lakes. That's kind of like our starting point. But if that blocking looks like it's going to be more persistent, you can certainly bring that colder air, for the winter as a whole closer to the I-95 corridor and suppress the southeast ridge a little bit more. So I would say anything through August or September, it's an educated guess based on the analogs. But once we start getting into October, once the pattern starts showing itself a little bit, that's where we can hone in. So that's something we do here through the fall and into the early part of the winter is we have a nice, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, we have a nice map here of what the analogs look like when we take them all and combine them and see what the average pattern kind of is. But even within these analogs, there are some years that have no blocking and are very mild, and then there are other years that have a lot of blocking and are colder. I would say between the two, I would say there are a few more analogs that have blocking and are colder than are the opposite or that are very mild. So that is somewhat encouraging that our analogs tend to lean in a blockier direction. But, it's hard to be really aggressive with the forecast until, you can have a little more confidence in which way that's actually going to go.
So, that's our general pattern. Thanks for describing it for us so well, Jim. But there's a couple of things I want to ask a little bit more about, and
gonna turn the heat up.
Yeah, I mean, well,
the proverbial heat, not the actual heat.
Right. No, don't touch the thermostat. No, it's just a few things that I know have been tossed around in long range forecast in the past, and I think one of the big ones that I hear a lot from is sunspots. How much does that really play into a forecast? Because a lot of people put a ton of weight on it, and other people kind of, put it to the side a little bit. So let's just talk about that just for a little.
Yeah. So, what we're talking about is sunspots. So, some brief background. The sun, to the naked eye, and you should never look at it with the naked eye, it looks exactly the same every day. But, but we have equipment nowadays, the power of modern technology. We can actually track how active the sunspots are. And the sunspots, they release different types of rays. And that's why sunspots actually can be damaging to like the electrical infrastructure if they're strong enough. They release certain types of waves that interact with the upper atmosphere in such a way that they can actually influence the weather pattern. And by the upper part of the atmosphere, I mean like the stratosphere. So the lowest level of the atmosphere where we live, that is the troposphere, and that is where like 98% of the weather happens. The level above our heads is the stratosphere. Usually the troposphere and stratosphere don't interact except for winter. Winter is the one season where they do interact here in the northern hemisphere. So when the sunspots are active, it tends to promote a stronger polar vortex in the stratosphere. And what I mean by stronger is it's compact, it sits near the North Pole, and if you kind of remember our blocking conversation, it sounds a lot like a pattern that has no blocking. So when sunspots are higher, it tends to correlate a little bit to a stronger stratospheric polar vortex and can argue against blocking. The opposite is true when the sunspots are lower. It can argue for a weaker polar vortex in the stratosphere that's, a little wavier and can be more conducive to blocking here in the troposphere where we live in the winter. We live here year-round, but the blocking occurs in winter. There's an 11-year sunspot cycle. They've been tracking these since the 1700s, and we are between cycle 24 and 25. We have been in a deep minimum the last few winters, which might explain why there was so much blocking last winter, and we're still close to the minimum. So, I would say this is unless we see a sudden increase in the sunspots this fall, I would say this is a factor that argues for, at least somewhat enhanced blocking potential this winter.
Right. Yeah. And I know in the past there's been very low sunspot cycles,
right.
Talking about the Maunder minimum, I believe.
Yeah, and those came with a streak of colder winters there in the 1800s, which we don't look, at least I don't look that far back for analogs. It's a little sketchy. But even more recently, the last solar minimum occurred around 2008, 2009, and a lot of times there's a bit of a lag here. And we had 2 winters in a row with a ton of blocking in 2009, 2010, 2010, 2011. 09 and 10, that was a strong El Nino. 10, 11 was a strong La Nina. Despite being completely opposite in the tropics, they both had a lot of blocking, and it's very likely that the solar minimum around there had something to do with that.
So what's up with the snowpack in Siberia? Because I've heard about that a few times now, how that can affect our winters.
Boy, burning questions about snow, huh? Sorry, guys.
Burning questions about snow, yes. We like to contradict ourselves.
So in terms of Siberian snowpack, the argument is, and again, this is a fall thing. This is another example of anything before roughly October is kind of an educated guess based off of just a larger set of analogs. This is an example of something that can help us hone in the fall. So the theory goes, and there have been several papers written about it, there is a correlation. The question is if is a causation, but the correlation is Octobers that have more snow cover growth across northern Eurasia, in particular Siberia and surrounding areas. Those snowier Octobers there tend to lead to more blocking in the following winter and hence colder weather across the central and eastern United States. Again, I'm not sure if there's definitely a correlation. It's not 100%. No correlation in weather for the most part is 100%. So like if there's another factor that might overwhelm it, that snow cover might not mean anything. But in a year like this where it's kind of a weaker La Nina, it very well may mean something. Early indications are there's going to be a lot of snow cover advancement there, which would tend to point to blocking. So it's certainly an interesting signal. Again, my kind of theory here is that snow cover is more a response to a larger pattern, so I think it's more of a symptom than a cause, but regardless, there's definitely a correlation, especially in years like this with a weaker Pacific signal. Early indications are we're going to have a lot of snow cover advancement there this month, which would maybe point towards more blocking, and we'll see if that holds up through the month.
All right. Well, he sets it straight on Siberian snow cover. I got another one for you, another acronym, QBO.
QBO.
What is up with the QBO? Because I know the NAO and the AO.
But QBO, quasi-biennial oscillation. It is a phenomenon that occurs in the stratosphere, the second level of the atmosphere that we talked about. And it is usually a rather cyclic phenomenon where strong westerly winds kind of descend through the stratosphere, and then easterly winds descend through the stratosphere. So the QBO, if it's negative, that means there are easterly winds compared to normal. So easterly winds compared to normal, that is kind of the opposite of the way the jet stream goes. The jet stream is usually west to east. So when you have those easterly winds, that can kind of point to an opposite kind of setup in the stratosphere. It can basically, easterly QBO can point to a weaker stratospheric polar vortex, which can lead to more blocking in the winter here in the troposphere. So that's the correlation there. That's the most kind of direct correlation. There's some other things in the pattern that it impacts. Like it can actually modulate the reaction to those tropical thunderstorms. I won't go into it a ton. I will just tell you that behind El Nino, La Nina, I would say QBO is probably up there in my top few things that I look for when I'm picking analog winters.
Hey, I think that pretty much covers everything for our first winter preview. So there it is, everybody. Jim, well, again, thanks for being here. This is the Weather Lounge, and, please find us anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. I think we're on just about everything, so you will be able to find us there. But also visit WeatherWorks on social media, and weatherworks.com is the place to go for our company's website. So if there's any more information, Jim will certainly be passing that along in mid-November, so please come back and listen then.